I love travel so much that a couple years ago at the end of COVID, I was really lucky to score a part-time job with a regional airline. Google is really great at general searches. So a lot of people don't know this, but you can type in Europe or you can type in a country like Chile or you can just say anywhere. Or if you leave the destination blank from your home airport and hit go or hit explore, there's an explore link also on the Google Flights homepage. It'll take you to this whole new website that it's just a map. It's super cool. And you can just scroll around the map and see the cheapest place for a variety of searches. Actually, Southwest often has at least once a year a mini buddy pass promotion. So I always share this. And a lot of my friends have taken advantage of this when I have shared it, where Southwest will say, if you book a trip on X in X month, like in a certain time frame, and take 2 one-way trips or 1 round trip flight in that time period, then you'll get a free buddy pass or travel companion to add to any travel that you do in a different time frame. So like for 2 or 3 months in the fall.
Hey there, points people! You just heard a clip from Tippy Moreland. Tippy is a passionate traveler who discovered affordable ways to explore the world while in grad school. She has visited 87 countries, 45 states, and all 7 continents since 2013, all while maintaining a full-time desk job. In this episode, expect to hear about binge travel and how it might benefit you if you work full-time, tips to get cheap flights for hard-to-get places or specific dates, how to get a side gig at an airline for tons of travel benefits, and so much more. In this episode, Tippy shares strategies using both cheap airfares and points. If you need a new credit card to boost your points balance, consider the Chase Sapphire Reserve. This card comes with a $300 annual travel credit, which can be used to offset some of the cheap airfares that you will book after learning Tippy's strategies. Remember, if you decide to apply for the Chase Sapphire Reserve or any other card, never ever ever apply directly through Google. Always use a friend or creator's referral link. And if you are interested in supporting this show when you apply for your next card, check out geobreezetravel.com/cards. And if you're not sure what card is right for you, I offer free credit card consultations at geobreezetravel.com/consultations. And we have links to the Chase Sapphire Reserve and the free consultation form for you in the show notes as well. And now, on with the show. Welcome to the GeoBreeze Travel Podcast, a show for anyone wanting to level up their travel hacking lifestyle. I'm your host, Julia Menez. I'm a travel hacker, coach, speaker, Filipino-American ENTJ who loves solid travel gear and using shortcuts on spreadsheets. On this show, I'm on a mission to bring you travel hackers from all walks of life to help you level up your travel hacking game. We dive into credit cards, miles, points, strategy, mindset, and the secrets behind how to travel the world for next to no cost. So, let's get hacking. Hey Tippy, welcome to the GeoBreeze Travel Podcast.
Thanks for having me, Julia.
I am so excited to have you here and to talk about binge travel and what does that mean and how do you do it and how are you finding such cheap flight deals, especially to hard to get places and events like the Olympics. But before we jump into all of that, tell us a little bit about your background and how did you get into this whole world of travel and points and everything else?
Yeah, I'll start off by saying I work a full-time desk job as a city planner. It's really hard in government and certain jobs to work remote. I think COVID changed that a little bit, but my biggest thing for travel is how do you do it if you're a normal person, right? Because we all read the blogs and follow everybody on social media when they have, fully remote jobs or they quit their job to travel the world, or you do once a year super aspirational points redemptions. But for the average person, how do you take advantage of flight deals? How do you take advantage of travel when you only have 2 weeks of PTO in a year? So as a city planner, and when I was in grad school, actually, I'll go back to when I was in grad school, I was really interested in seeing more of the world. I'm originally from Hawaii and I had island fever. I grew up on Oahu and felt like I would never leave. My mom's from Thailand, so I did grow up with a passport, fortunately, but I wanted to see more of the world, but just never thought I could afford it. So I after college and toward the end of grad school, I discovered some points and travel blogs, Flyer Talk, a few resources that one of my friends from undergrad pointed me toward. He actually was really instrumental in getting me started with super travel or binge travel, whatever you want to call it, at the start, probably around 2012. He was the one that told me that your credit actually doesn't get hurt when you apply for points and miles cards. So I always thought it was a gimmick. Oh, you sign up for the card, you get points and miles, but you can never use it. We had a long talk about how it affects your credit. And it's somebody that I really trust. Otherwise, I would never have gone for it. And I started researching points and miles cards. I did get my first points and miles card initially because Chase Sapphire sponsored the Sundance Film Festival in Park City. It wasn't actually for travel, but that was around the same time. And I started figuring out more and more about earning points and miles, which led me to actually a handful of blogs that specialize in cheap cash tickets. I know a lot of social media talks about how to earn and spend points and miles, but I got really good at finding the cheap cash fares to the point where I earned at the time like platinum pro status on American Airlines just based on travel before it became you earn status based on how much you spent. So I was traveling so much on cheap fares that I was getting a lot of perks that I haven't wanted to let go of. So I've continued on with some of the credit cards and other types of points and miles travel, but that's the beginning when I was in grad school. I'm also really fortunate that since I started working full time in 2013, I've had mostly a 4-10 work schedule. So I do 10-hour days, 4 days a week. And on the weekends, I'll usually flex a day here and there with a holiday. If I have a 3-day weekend, like every other weekend, and it's a holiday, I'll have a 4-day weekend. I can use 10 hours of PTO or 20 hours to make that a 5 or 6. And with that in mind, all of a sudden, time wasn't an issue, especially if you haven't done a lot of travel. The two biggest hurdles that I would say are time and money. We really focus on the money, though. How do you afford travel? How do you leverage points and miles, money, any resource that you have? I got really good at leveraging my time. So I would have Fridays off. I would leave Thursday on a red eye flight, come back Monday morning and make it to the office barely in time for work. So luckily I didn't have any cancellations or any issues. I think it's only happened twice in my life, knock on wood. But I've been able to build this lifestyle, this mentality that if I want to see more of the world, which was something I didn't have the luxury to do when I was younger, before I started working full time and before I had 3-day weekends, then I had to be okay with taking shorter trips. So I know it's not ideal, but it's something that works for me, at least I'd rather go than not go, right? So if you can find deals, I started to build a mindset that if I don't see everything I want to see in Paris, I'll always go back. There will always be another deal that I can take advantage of at a future time. And that's really helped me to enjoy travel more as well.
How are you finding these deals?
Yeah, now I would say Google Flights is probably my best friend. I used to use the ITA search matrix religiously. I still use it quite a bit now, but Google had bought the software that they're integrating into Google Flights more and more as time goes by. Google Flights essentially searches every airline in the world all at the same time. So you don't have to go to every individual airline's website to look for a flight. And then it'll take you directly to the airline to book direct with them. You don't have to book through Google, so that it's not a third party booking. So you have all the benefits of booking directly with X airline. And I've also recently, in the last couple of years, discovered like you can have plugins. They're constantly adding functionalities, but a different company set up this plugin for Google Flights called Points Path. It's not 100% great. I don't know if you use it yourself, but it's really helpful for getting an idea of what award availability is out there at a glance, just looking at everything all at once. And it's not a paid service. There's a lot of things you can use out there, but that's been really helpful for me. Google Flights is pretty much the biggest thing. I also have followed various bloggers and websites over the years. My favorite used to be The Flight Deal. It was theflightdeal.com, and they had a sister website, fairdealalert.com. And I think they still function as a website, but they have the paid feature now where you can pay for the best deals. I think that's where the blogosphere for cheap flights has gone these days. And I think my favorite is now still, it used to be Scott's Cheap Flights, but they I think they changed to going.com. So I always recommend that people follow them as well.
For people who are like, okay, I've used Google Flights, but only to get from like Minneapolis over to Dallas on this specific date. If you're like, I just want to find a good $200 round trip flight over to somewhere over the ocean, what do you even type into Google Flights to make those results happen?
Yeah, Google is really great at general searches. So a lot of people don't know this, but you can type in Europe, or you can type in a country like Chile, or you can just say anywhere. Or if you leave the destination blank from your home airport and hit go or hit explore, there's an explore link also on the Google Flights homepage. It'll take you to this whole new website that it's just a map. It's super cool. And you can just scroll around the map and see the cheapest place for a variety of searches. So you could say anywhere in the next 6 months, that's a weekend or week long trip. I just want to go somewhere at any point in the future, or maybe in August, you can narrow it down to just the month of August. And you can just scroll around and be like, wow, it's $300 from Salt Lake to Paris that time. You can click on it, it'll give you the dates. Or if you have a set weekend or set time that you need to take off work. For instance, if you have kids, if it's their spring break, if you do want to do something like go over Memorial Day weekend that's coming up, even for a last minute trip, I wouldn't call it out of the question if it's like in a week or two from now to just go on Google Flights and use the explore function and just search anywhere in the world for the weekend or the dates that you have, and you can get some pretty good deals.
Awesome. What are some of the cool deals that you have gotten over the years?
Yeah. So I think it was maybe 6 or 7 years ago. And this again was from that website, the flight deal that I used. They had published a deal that was on Etihad, which is a really good airline. And it was from either Chicago or New York. So it was really easy for me. I'm based in Salt Lake City. You could get a cheap flight out to either city. And you could go to either Abu Dhabi, to India, pretty much any city in India, or to the Seychelles for under $200 round trip. And that was with either a direct flight to Abu Dhabi or with a stop in Abu Dhabi. And it was live. That sale was live for maybe 3 weeks. Like it just didn't die. It was just that price for a very long time. But it came out during the holidays. I think Christmas Eve was the day that it dropped on sale. And so I had booked two separate flights, weekend trips out of this deal where it was $177 round trip for me to go from New York to Abu Dhabi. And so I spent about 4.5 days there, met up with some European friends and went around the city. And I booked a separate weekend over Labor Day later in the year because I didn't have PTO. And it was, I think, it was about $280 round trip to go from Salt Lake to New York to India. And I used points to get to New York. So I went New York, Abu Dhabi to New Delhi. And because it was under $300, my rule, I can sleep on airplanes. I think that's the other trick to doing travel like this. I have no problems falling asleep on long flights, regardless of being in the air for 35 or 40 hours. If the flight was under $300 and I would be in India for 3 days, I booked it. So that's what happened. Like I barely had enough PTO to make this trip happen, but I had 4 days. I had 4 days off over Labor Day weekend, and I added an extra day of PTO. So I spent 2 days in the air and 3 days in India, but it was in my budget. The hostels I stayed at were about $4 a night. Those were the high end hostels as well. And I hired a taxi when I was on the ground that took me to the Golden Triangle and stopped me at each of the hostels and a couple of the destinations that I wanted to see. I definitely stopped in Agra to see the Taj Mahal and saw Fort Agra and all of the highlights, all that you can see in 3 days. I definitely would have liked more time, but it was worth it.
So this was in economy for anybody wondering.
Yes.
It was not a $300 business class flight. This is an economy. Do you know if that was a mistake fare or they meant to do it as like a promotional sale?
Yeah, I think it was a mistake fare, but I know that some people have a complicated relationship with that term. But this one actually was a mistake on behalf of an OTA, an online travel agency. So it was a third party mistake. So the airline honored the fares, but I think the OTA had to eat the cost. So whatever agreement they had with, I think it was on Orbitz and Travelocity, they honored the ticket. So when I was boarding my flight, I think there were at least three other people that got the same deal that I did. And two of them I've stayed really close with, some of my backpacker travel friends over the years, and I ran into them in different countries. So it's been really fun. But the airline, yeah, it priced out at $0 and tax. So I only paid the taxes on these flights.
That is insane. Okay, for somebody who's like, oh, 3 days like to India, 3 days in India, 1 day back and forth, it sounds like a lot. What are your tips for just being able to physically handle this, other than it really helps if you can sleep on planes?
Yeah, that's a great question. This kind of travel, especially at long distances, is not for everybody. But the way I like to think about it in terms of short travel is, especially for Americans, I think when we go to a place like Europe, how many days you spend in one city? Most people spend 2, 3, or 4 days before they want to go see somewhere else anyway. So it's actually not too different than seeing one city on a typical week or 2 week long trip that people normally book, right? So it's just that you're flying a lot more. You're only seeing one place and then you're flying a lot more to and from. So if you can wrap your head around being in one city for 2, 3, or 4 days, like a short amount of time, and think about a normal like longer trip you would take, it's not too different. So it's just, how do you handle the flight in my mind? How do you handle the actual travel? But again, my parents couldn't do this, and the older I get, the harder it is as well. I would say you have to know your limits with like red eye flights, what you need when you're flying east versus west. I think for me, flying east, I always get more jet lag than if I'm flying west. So anytime I come back from Asia, I know I'm going to need like a day and a half to get back to a normal schedule. Usually I'll fly back and then go straight to work, right? So I'll get tired by the afternoon, and I know if it's a Monday, I'm going to sleep as soon as I get home from work for like 12 hours. If I can do that, then I'll be on a more normal schedule instead of taking naps throughout the day. If you can afford or find a deal that's not in economy, that really helps as well. Since then, I used to only do budget travel because I was trying to stretch my cash and my points and everything to see as many places as I could. Now that I'm getting a little older and I have more resources at hand, I have been traveling a lot more in premium cabins. It does make a difference as far as how rested you feel. But if you're just trying to travel more, then I would say it's worth the economy seat for these types of prices. And make sure you're drinking all the water and standing up every few hours if you're not sleeping. Gosh, something I really loved that is not in economy, but I've discovered when I flew United Polaris for the first time, is they have face spray. Like they have this like moisturizing face spray that you can spray in the bathrooms. And that's made a huge difference for me in terms of how I feel and like my skin, and just not feeling so as grungy when I get off a long flight. So I've actually been looking for products like that that I realize make a difference in the quality of my experience when I'm done traveling, whether I go back to work or if I'm at my destination.
Something I've taken to doing as well is I'll usually have like one glass of champagne for just photo purposes. And then I try to not drink alcohol the rest of the flight, because when you first get into business class, I don't know if you're like this or if you even drink, but a lot of people are like, oh my God, there's like unlimited alcohol and unlimited champagne, and I should have 8 in an 8-hour flight. And I'm like, you're gonna hate yourself by the end of it. Like, just because it's free does not mean you have to eat and drink it. So I definitely agree with the stay hydrated tip. I'm like a one and done champagne at this point for business class flights, where I'm like, I will rather try out all the smoothies, the fancy coffee drinks. My fun calories are going to go towards desserts instead of more cocktails. But that's just something that I found helps a lot with acclimating, as well as maybe like 1 or 2 alcoholic drinks on the actual flight.
Yeah, definitely. I think most recently I got a Delta One seat when I got engaged in January in Thailand. And on the way back, we ended up getting an upgraded seat to Delta One. And the flight attendants were so nice and they kept bringing by alcohol, but I just couldn't drink it. I just couldn't. It just stayed on my table, even though I didn't have anywhere to be when I got home. After a while, you do get used to it. And it's like, okay, yeah, thank you. But I wanna feel good when I land, definitely.
Did you get the upgrade because of some kind of Delta status or because you were like, "Hey, we just got engaged?" Because I think people try that all the time, right? Where they're like,
Yeah.
"Upgrade us, we got engaged."
I think you can write ahead to airlines, and I've heard of people who have had luck writing ahead, but that is something that each airline and each airport has a choice or an ability to give an upgrade. But I think it's getting less and less frequent the more that our airline is moving toward earning profits. Again, what I'll say is that this might be a good time to bring up that I love travel so much that a couple years ago at the end of COVID, I was really lucky to score a part-time job with a regional airline. And it was a really good time to try to do this. It's something I've tried like since I was 18. And the airlines are really hard to get in with. You really have to know people to refer you before you get an interview. It doesn't matter how qualified you are or how good you would be as a gate agent, for example. The airlines just weren't hiring. People were really happy working for them, especially in part time customer service jobs like a weekend gate agent. So toward the end of COVID, when people were starting to travel again, the airlines had laid off probably at least half of their workforce. And these were people that they had offered retirement to, people that couldn't come back to work. It wasn't a furlough, it was fully laid off or retired staff. So they were really desperate to really quickly ramp up the number of agents that they had working in different airports. And so I got really lucky to notice this and get one of the last jobs that they were hiring. I think they didn't hire for almost a year after I started, which was January in 2022. So I was working about 10 hours a week on the weekends for this regional airline, and they had connections with several other major airlines that I could fly on with certain stipulations. If you don't work directly for the partner airline, you might have to pay a fee. But you do qualify for space available. So international flights, airlines tend to not upgrade people actually like they do on domestic flights. They really want to earn the money from the revenue on those international premium products. And so if you're a staff member, even for a partner airline, you have some odds of getting products like Delta One or United Polaris. So I've been really lucky to have that opportunity. So unfortunately, that airline does not operate at Salt Lake City anymore, but it was a really fun gig. And so it led me to add that to my resume. And now I got a seasonal job. So I actually only work during the holidays on the weekends, and I'm able to make it work with my regular job. I still fly quite a bit with points and miles though, and on fair deals, because it's space available and having another job means it's not a guarantee that I'll be back in the office on Monday. So maybe I will fly standby on a Friday or a Thursday night somewhere internationally, but I'll make sure that I have enough points and miles to make it back, or that there's enough space that I feel comfortable that I'll make it back. Usually I buy points tickets to get home just to make sure that I have that seat. But the biggest reason that I started that was because when you work for an airline, your parents get benefits. My parents just retired a couple of years ago, so it was really good timing so that they could afford to travel in retirement. I don't think living in Hawaii, it's really expensive out there. So if they wanted to, I don't think they could have earned enough points and miles or found enough deals to see as much of the world as they want to. Hawaii is expensive on points or cash to go anywhere in the world. It's been really, really nice to be able to give that to them.
That is an amazing perk that I didn't even think about where it extends to all of your immediate family or just parents and spouse and child, like who all can
Mhm.
benefit in a family that has this.
Yeah, usually it's parents and spouse. If you're not married, you can do a plus one, and then any children that you have. For instance, through the regional airline benefits that I used to have, United allowed you to just designate a friend. So it doesn't matter if it's a spouse or not, you would have a friend that's listed. Or there's an option if you're United employees directly, I believe they get up to two friends, but then it's in exchange for buddy passes. So you don't get buddy passes. Anyway, I'm not sure of the details anymore. Yeah. But you can designate a friend usually. So I was able to designate my brother on one airline, and then my best friend on another airline when I had multiple airline benefits. So that was fun about working for a regional as opposed to now I just have my parents and then my fiance on my benefits.
You alluded to this a little bit, but talk about scheduling issues where if you're doing this kind of binge travel where you're like, I've got 3 days and it is like down to the wire where you're like, I'm going to make it back into work on time. And then you just like, something goes wrong, flight gets delayed. How do you handle that situation?
Yeah, I think this applies for anybody, regardless of whether you're flying standby, because last summer was a really bad summer for in Europe. Like certain big airlines like Lufthansa were just canceling flights left and right with various strikes at certain airports. It's just really good to know how to do this in general. I think always have a plan B, C, and D, right? So if you're going to fly somewhere, have more than one way out, right? I guess an example I'll give is I spent about a month 2 years ago working in the country of Georgia. So I actually got a master's of tourism administration from George Washington University during COVID. And my last class was actually doing a consulting project for the National Tourism Administration in the country of Georgia, which was really, really cool. But I had to be back for working for the airline, which is a lot more strict than working for an office job where I might be able to have an extra day of PTO if I had that on hand to make up for a missed flight or something. But I couldn't miss this shift at the airport. And I was flying back on points from Georgia. I initially wanted to spend about 12 hours in Warsaw because I'd never been to Poland. So why not? That's a place that's easy to leave the airport to go to the city and come back. Why not visit Poland on the way home? So that was my goal. And I had booked the direct flight on United during the summer. They added a direct flight from Salt Lake to Frankfurt on Eurowings. It's the discount version of Eurowings, which is a subsidiary of Lufthansa. And so I had booked a flight from Tbilisi to Warsaw to Frankfurt to Salt Lake. And it came with an overnight in Frankfurt. But I'm so grateful that I had booked this like extra day and a half layover in Warsaw because my flight was canceled from Warsaw to Frankfurt. And I had found out in Tbilisi, and United had no availability to book me home. Like they could have changed my flight date, but they couldn't have gotten me home in time or to Frankfurt in time for that direct flight to Salt Lake. But because I had that window where I had the layover in Warsaw in Poland, I was able to book a last minute ticket on Turkish Airways. So I flew through Istanbul to get to Frankfurt, and I made it with 3 hours to spare of my original flight. So knowing what airlines fly in and out of an airport is really beneficial. Knowing what points you have available to you. I knew that did have a lot of service by Turkish Airways. So I was really lucky that I talked to the agent at the airport for Turkish to see if I could buy a ticket because people were checking in for that flight. And it's a small airport and they didn't have another flight out that day at all, I think. And they said, no, it was a sold out flight. But somehow I was able to find it on their website for points and I booked it. So it was not my best redemption, not my favorite use of. But if you really need to be back in a pinch or by a certain day or time, my points and miles have saved me like that in numerous occasions.
It's not as bad as when I missed 2 flights trying to get back from Canada back to the US after a conference. I was just yeah, that one points couldn't save me. That was just $1,000 issue, but live and learn. Things happen. So, are you doing this solo all the time, or are you doing this with like multiple people are traveling?
Yeah, most of my travel in the past has been solo, but I think The more you travel, you probably recognize this. The more you travel, the more friends you make in different parts of the world, and the more people will travel with you or come to see you. So I think most of the time my flights might be solo, but I'm in a destination with multiple other people. But since last summer, my fiance has been traveling with me a lot. I think I'm going to be traveling a lot more solo again, though, because he just started PA school and he's not allowed to work remote. He has to be in person 8 to 5, Monday through Friday. We'll see how that goes. But it's been really fun since last summer to have a travel buddy. So it's a lot more stressful because you do need two empty seats to fly standby, and it's a lot harder to get points tickets for two people, even in economy, gosh, these days. But it's really fun. I think it took him a while. It takes a lot of people a while to try to recognize that, okay, you might not make it, right? But I think more often than not, you do make it. I think most recently, we had debated on whether or not to buy tickets to go to Ohio for the eclipse. My dad is from Ohio, and I haven't been back since my grandpa passed away a few years ago. But my uncle's house was right through the path of totality, and I got to visit most of my extended family on that side when we went for the eclipse. But trying to leave, I probably should have bought a ticket because we risked our chances, and it took a while to get there, but we had time getting there. But because the eclipse was on a Monday and we both had to be back at work on Tuesday, it was a pain getting back. Like, I had to be at a city council meeting on Tuesday night, and I had an in-person meeting that afternoon I just couldn't miss. So we almost had to buy like $1,000 ticket to get home that day. But luckily, I was able to get on a flight from Columbus to Atlanta. And then Dan was able to get on a Southwest flight. We had to split up, and then we both were able to make it from Atlanta. But I only made it because the flight that had space from Atlanta to Salt Lake had been delayed. Sometimes, as an employee, you get benefits from partner airlines, but then sometimes you don't, and you'll just have to pay full fare points or cash. I'm always surprised, though, at how many airline employees aren't aware of what their standby benefits can get them or what partners they can work with. I think sometimes I'll see deals even on hotels or cruises or other travel related things that are a good perk as well. But most people just work. So it's really nice to have a seasonal or part-time job that you can actually use the benefits for.
And if you just work, like, let's say one Christmas season, you get the benefits for the entire rest of the year because you're technically like still on staff for next Christmas season.
Yep. Yep. You have to hit a minimum hour requirement in a year. So each airline has a different requirement, but then you get to fly year round. So yeah, if you live near any airport, actually, I would just say be on the lookout for any sort of seasonal job, whether it's a ramp agent or a gate agent. I think Hawaiian Airlines is just starting up here in Salt Lake City. They're adding a direct flight every day to and from Honolulu from Salt Lake. And I saw that they're hiring, I don't know, it's really fun to see what's out there. I think American Airlines just opened in Provo City, which is about an hour south of Salt Lake. So I saw that they were hiring in Provo. Sometimes the regional airlines run those types of smaller airport operations as well. So if you're familiar with smaller regional airlines, it'll say American Airlines operate in tiny small print operated by X Airlines. So those are the regional airlines that I'm talking about. So you don't know that you're flying them most of the time. Those are good ones to start off with because I think they tend to have more part-time work.
Where are you finding these? Is it just the airport website, the airline website, job boards? How do you find these gigs?
Yeah, so I just constantly have a Google career search for airline jobs in Salt Lake City, airline jobs. Oh, I still have a Hawaii search for my little sister. I'm trying to get her to get a job in the airlines. If you just have a search that's saved to your Google account like that, I'll get a notification like once a week, or you can request a notification whenever something pops up. Half the time they're just third-party websites like Indeed that heard of the job posting or somebody posted it. I would never apply through a third party for an airline, but it's just a way to see that there is an opening. And then each airline themselves has a notification option on their job board website. Every airline kind of has a different company that they use for their HR that way, but you can have a notification sent to you whenever certain types of jobs in certain locations pop up. So I think if you do all of the above, That tends to be good. A lot of my friends who work at the airlines also work for hotels. And I think hotels can often hire through third party websites like indeed.com or those types of monster.com, especially the smaller, like non-chain owned websites, hotels. Those will use different websites and not like hilton.com, right? So they would probably not be posted on hilton.com for these smaller, like mom and pop owned but branded hotels.
If somebody was just wanting to get started with all of these different tricks you do, which I love these because it's very different from what we usually hear about on the show, where people are like, just get a Chase Sapphire Preferred and then redeem them with Hyatt, which is great, but people do that all the time. I like how different and unique your skill set is with binge traveling and getting part-time jobs within the airline industry. If someone wanted to just get started with binge travel and they're like, I don't think I can do 3 days in India. What do you recommend for somebody as far as like how to search for domestic trips and what to aim for if someone's like, yeah, I'm just getting started with this. I'm still building up my points bank. I don't have a lot of points yet. I'd like to do binge travel because I'm still working a 9 to 5. What do I do?
Yeah, that's a great question. I actually, as much as I've done these huge, crazy international trips, I'm a very big proponent for more domestic travel as well, even road trips. So it doesn't binge travel. I define as just traveling more with less time. So even if it's just doing more road trips, I think that counts because even the government, and I think nationally with the United Nations, they define travel as anything more than 50 miles. So, some people's commutes are travel every day, right? But anything more than 50 miles from your home address is considered travel as far as data collection purposes for spending money, time, hotels, any data collection for the travel industry. That was something I learned through getting my master's in the industry, which has been a fun way to try to learn about the other side of things as well. But yeah, so being here in Utah, if you go to St. George for the weekend, that's something that it takes you outside of your home environment, and you do get a lot of benefits from even traveling somewhere closer to home. Outside of road trips, though, cheap flights can be found anywhere. And a lot of times, airlines like American, Delta, United, they'll have really, really cheap fares for shorter flights. Sometimes the rules change here and there, but sometimes you can find distance based awards where if you're traveling anywhere less than 1,000 miles or X number of miles, then it'll be a set cheap fare or it'll be on sale more often, whatever it is. Don't let that deter you. Even if you're trying to go like Salt Lake to Vegas is a really close distance, but a lot of people take that flight very, very, very often. And so Southwest often has flights for 2,000 points, Salt Lake to Vegas each way. So that one's something that I really enjoy sharing. Actually, Southwest often has at least once a year a mini buddy pass promotion. So I always share this. And a lot of my friends have taken advantage of this when I have shared it, where Southwest will say, if you book a trip on X in X month, like in a certain time frame, and take 2 one-way trips or one round trip flight in that time period, then you'll get a free buddy pass or travel companion to add to any travel that you do in a different time frame. So like for 2 or 3 months in the fall. So my best friend just did that, and she's using that to take her daughter to my wedding in Hawaii. It cuts the price in half for traveling as far as Hawaii. So little promotions like that with airlines like Southwest are really beneficial as well, and fun to dabble in, especially if you're not really big into points and miles. Getting that free travel on an airline like Southwest where you don't have to worry about seat assignments. I think that has been a really fun way to engage a lot of my friends that don't really do points and miles.
Those are all fantastic tips. And speaking of great tips, can you give a shout out to somebody else on the internet who you would recommend listeners follow for even more travel tips or points tips or anything else?
Yeah, so I really love Andy's travel blog. He does a blog, but he also has Instagram. So I think it's andystravelblog.com. And then let me double check what his Instagram handle is. But Andy is an expert in both points and miles and cheap flights. And he loves to break it down for people step by step as to everything that he did to take a trip. But he also is just so wonderful at sharing the narrative of travel. I think that's something that a lot of people are missing on social media. You have the how to, and then you have the what we did. But I think there's a larger story at play for how travel engages people. That's something that I'm really big on. Like, I like talking about binge travel because I think it's a way to get more people to travel. We have all these aspirational redemptions and things that a lot of people save up points and miles to do, but I'm trying to encourage other people that used to be like me that didn't know that they have the time or money to travel to think about travel differently so that you can travel more and gain those benefits. When you apply for college, a lot of people will use a travel story to say, "Oh, I went to Africa and volunteered with the children there." That was really big when I was going into college with volunteers. People that grow up poor, that don't travel as much, you don't have those experiences. So I think it's really, really great when people share the story of travel and try to help encourage other people to do the same. So I think Andy does that as well. And his handle is Real Andy Luton.
And where can people find you if they want to hear more about your travel and your stories, and or if they just have questions about what it is that you do with binge travel and questions about kind of side gigging for different airlines?
Yeah, so I have an Instagram under my name at Tippe Moreland. So that's TIPPEMORLAN. It's just my name. That's where I mostly share everything about my travels. Or if I'm doing something else, like at one point in time, I had a podcast myself, but I haven't done anything in 3 years. But anything like that will be linked to my Instagram. And I'm happy to take DMs and chat with anybody on Instagram as well.
Perfect. Well, thank you again, Tiffy, so much for coming onto the show. It's been such a pleasure having you and getting to learn about your style of binge travel and also different perks that people can get for doing side gig work, even on weekends or holidays with different airlines. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, Julia.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode of the GeoBreeze Travel Podcast. If any of the cards mentioned in today's episode piqued your interest, please check out the links in the show notes for more information on any of the cards. Also, if you apply for a card using the links on that page, I may receive a commission too, so please and thank you. P.S. I hear the links work better in Internet Explorer or Safari, and sometimes the credit card applications tend to glitch out in Chrome. Additionally, it would mean the world to me if you could subscribe to this podcast, leave a 5-star review, and share it with a friend. And if you would like to make even more travel hacking friends, please sign up for the Patreon to access our monthly masterclass hangouts. We dive deep into a particular points program each month, and you'll get to ask all of your travel hacking questions and enjoy being around other people who enjoy points and miles just as much as you and I do. If you would like an invite to the next one, head over to geobreezetravel.com/hangouts to sign up to be on the invite list. Take care and happy travels!